Another episode of Detonation coming your way. And we've got candidate number 2, Charles B Holsopple. He's all the way from Tampa, Florida, in the United States, because he's running for president of the United States. Mr. Holsopple, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steele. Thank you very much. Running for the nomination of the Transhumanist Party just now. We won't get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's the presidential primary candidate. This is the
Right.
MSNBC version of the transhumanist debate platform. It's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you very much. How did you get? We're going to run through a quick stint of questions, but just before we do, how did you get involved and who are you?
Well, as you say, my name's Charles Holsopple, and I got involved just by being born and being conscious, really, when I look at it. And I've always felt like I wanted to make things work well, where things could work well in relationship to my existence, if you will. And as some of my earliest memories were at the grocery store and preschool, and I was at the grocery store and trying to get down out of the cart to get a drink of water. As we can all relate, the grocery store has a water fountain. And there were two water fountains, one white, one colored. And those are some of the first words I learned to read, I suppose. And that, when I asked my father what the difference was between the water, this was 1957, 58, somewhere in there, in Tampa, he told me that there was no difference in the water. And when I persisted, I think he said the colored one's sweeter. And my mother was tugging on his pant leg. She was an immigrant from Scotland, and she didn't want to cause a ruckus in the middle of the grocery store, And so I learned that though we call things different, it wasn't true, right? And society was making a big deal out of something that was in common, and I sensed that. And then out by the mailbox preschool, I had learned about heaven and hell from Sunday school. And I was talking to little Jenny about heaven and hell and the clear choice and the only choice. And she says, well, we don't believe in Jesus. And so I asked my mother, and she said, well, Jenny's not going to hell. She's Jewish. And, all these kids that haven't heard about Jesus, they're not going to hell either. Don't panic at this point. This is not. And so I pretty much grew up distrusting binary choices. There's always a third option. And don't take a side, because these people that are taking sides are not really, they're looking at false equivalents. They're not addressing the real issues. So I started working at 10 years old, little capitalist, and mowing lawns, and then I was a bellhop at 12. I was dishwashing at 13. I was a desk clerk at 15. And I got out of the Army. I got out of school. The Army had my number down low in the draft. I joined as a medic. I served for 3 years. I got out. I went to the VA hospital, and I was a psychiatric nursing assistant there. And my brother and father were contractors, so I was in that side jobs and nothing special. And I got into sales of commodity lumber eventually, to where I was trading from the sawmills to the distributors or to the major consumers. And that brought me into, not big business, but I traded a few $100 million worth of product in my life. And during that time, I bought real estate in this little area of Tampa that I'm in, and it was very good to me. But about 15 years ago, I got divorced. And I set most of my funds with my ex to do a lump sum, and she was happy and I was happy. The kids were about out of college. And I set out on this sabbatical to change the world, because I had this idea of a rapidly deployable housing structure out of fabric that could be coated and made rigid into a shell. And then that indigenous material from that surrounding area could be infilled to make it a compressive strength, and you would have a very quick rudimentary structure. So I took that idea to the University of Akron and explained what I could see. If those molds could be clustered and stacked and engineered with the infrastructure pre-planned, it could help revolutionize the way that we do so much of our construction. Now, this was in 2005, the University of Akron, the Polymer Science Engineering School. I ended up with 4 different department chairs that were fascinated and intrigued by this. Well, that was fine, but I'm not a scientist, but I had these scientists interested, and it got down to funding and intellectual properties and patents. And I realized it, and when I got started, I realized it was a massive project. It could help transform the way that we build. One aspect they were interested in is forward troop movements for the military. If you go in and put a architecturally designed structure up for the troops that looks like but performs better than the original structures that culture is familiar with, and then you leave, it not only pays up front, but it continues to pay in goodwill. So I was encouraged to continue this, but way over my head when it came to getting into all of that. And I realized during that process, it doesn't matter what structure we're made out of. It could be affordable and well-performing, energy efficient, but if we don't build the individual's understanding of our role within our society as well as within our environment, I'd rather have a silk sheet between us than a concrete wall if we're throwing grenades back and forth. So I had to come back with the question, okay, what can bring us together to a common understanding that we all have in common? And what question can be asked that will identify those with empathetic and intellectual understanding of our situation, our shared existence? And that turned out to be the common denominators are food, water, shelter, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so the question I came up with was, are you better off if your neighbor has dignified access within civil society and that was it for a while. And so food, water, shelter, common, I called it Global Shelter Project. I went to DC in 2011 after traveling different parts of the world and just going on this walkabout, this sabbatical I started in 2005. And in 2011, I ended up on Freedom Plaza the day that the Occupy movement broke out in Washington, D.C. And pretty soon somebody had brought tents, and there were 50, 100 tents on the plaza. We set up a kitchen, and it was quite a peace festival, really. It was an example of community living, and we took care of the orders of the day for about 3.5 months. Well, a month into that, not even, I met the little White House Peace Vigil in front of the White House. It's been there since 1981. That was started by William Thomas, who was kicked out of London for not having his ID. He came back and sat at the steps of the White House, or at the gates of the White House, and was adamant about nuclear disarmament. And that was his goal. So he was there up until 2009 when he died. And along with him was his early partner, Concepcion Picciotto. When I met her, she was 72. And William's wife, Ellen Thomas, was there for many years as well. But this is a historic site. It's still there, by the way. 2 signs, 4x4 in front of the White House, that somebody has to be there 24 hours a day. So anyway, I befriended little Connie, and I spent about 2,000 hours in front of the White House during the winter of 2011, 2012. And that little vigil cover in between those signs is about 200 cubic feet. And so it was a cathartic experience living among the homeless in the street with the professional demonstrators, the protesters. You may have heard of Code Pink, that is a women's rights and children's rights advocacy group here. They're quite active in the political sphere of whether the U.S. is acting appropriately in other countries, as well as here in the U.S. Bill Moyer with Backbone Campaign. They're very excellent organization that demonstrates for human rights. And Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers of Popular Resistance and others. So I was exposed to a wide variety of human rights issues and claims by different factions of other people doing harm to the environment or to the people of the world, or the U.S. So that was an awakening, and but Occupy fizzled out, and I'm thinking, okay, I went up to D.C. not to promote Occupy, though I got heavily involved in it. I was going up to promote this scientific opportunity that if we supported this construction of society along with the construction of this housing industry, we could transform the way that humanity deals with what's the existential threats, that we could come together and recognize common threats. So anyway, back to the drawing board, and in 2013, since 2005, I hadn't had a car, but I finally bought a car and said, I'm going to drive back up to DC. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to go to wherever I can, to the Indian reservations and the Dakotas. And so I drove for over 20,000 miles during those 7 or 8 months. And I ended up in Berkeley, California, and I threw my wallet away, went homeless in the streets in People's Park. If you Google People's Park, Berkeley, it's a historic site since the Beat generation of people that are advocating human rights and decency. So I ended up there, and that put me about 30 pounds lighter and dehydrated, and driving back to Tampa in 3 days to take care of a friend that was sick. Well, long story short, I got sick and was unable really then I got misdiagnosed, and medication was wrong, and I was quite sick for 6 months, weak, and then I started recovering. But out of that, 222 came to be, in the 200 cubic feet from the little vigil, the size of a tent, the size of the interior of a car that I spent a lot of time in that year.
All right.
And yeah, so that's kind of where it came from.
Okay, so let me ask you about 222, because that's a great backstory, and I want to talk to you briefly as well about Occupy Wall Street, because that's fascinating. But I got to run through these questions to give you a fair go. So, sure. 222 is we are all better off. This is the quote, direct quote. So it's we are all better off. We are all better off if each of us have dignified access to minimum of 2 gallons of fresh water, 2,000 nutritional calories, and 2,000 cubic feet of secure shelter. We envision a world where all of humankind understands their role in a civilized society and has the freedom to achieve self-sustainability. So that's kind of a very universalist approach to solving some of these food, water, shelter issues. So we know how you came across that. It's out of personal experience up there in People's Park, being sort of having those resources sort of removed from you, I'd say, or being able. That was
part of it.
Yeah, being able to survive. But we'll go on, and I'll ask you some of these questions, and then we'll go back to talking about this. And I really want to talk to you about Occupy as well. That would be really good. So we've kind of done this already. So the first question was discuss your background and why you think it would render you an effective president of the United States.
Well, my background wouldn't necessarily. We're going again after the candidacy of the Transhumanist Party, which is a whole other set of qualifications. But in the wild event that I were to be president, and what qualifications would it bring, is one, the ability to stay calm in a crisis, which we're full of crisis right now, and also my ability to trust and verify the people that I'm dealing with, the ability to reach a level of understanding, and when that understanding is something that I don't trust, then I'm pretty keen about that as well. So really judgment, I don't have the experience. I don't have the international experience, the diplomacy. I could work on, but I would rely heavily on a cabinet, and I would start with a lot of the people that are running for president now.
Yeah, so Donald Trump didn't have any experience either, and he used that as a backbone of his sort of campaign as well. Just putting that comment in there. So what do you
Well, he had a lot more experiences than I had that I would not want to put on my record. So I'm not worried. I'm not worried about Donald Trump just yet.
What do you consider to be the most important aspects of transhumanism, and what kinds of impacts should this have upon the world?
Well, I think those go together as far as the existential threats and using science, technology, reason, ethics, and cultural values. So they're all tied into one, but existential threats that we face now, just from the degradation of society and the polarization of false equivalencies when we get into certain areas of public decision making, it's often far removed from the best possible solution because of special interest. So the transhumanist party is all about using science, technology, reason. And if we identify the existential threats that are most that need dealt with most urgent and most necessarily in a systemic way that ties in our individual happiness, our individual pursuit of our dreams, while not encroaching on others. The Transhumanist Party has some wildly wonderful ideas and pursuits that they are individually pursuing. Whether or not it can be put to scale that everybody can enjoy the fruits of those that are putting the most into it is, that's a whole nother question. But I see the Project 222 platform and the transhumanist platform using technology and to advance, whether it be the shelter aspect or water filtration or the food fortification or the efficiency in any of those. It all gets back to how we educate the public once we actually identify the best candidate methodologies to move forward and invest in.
What are the areas of the US Transhumanist Party platform that you identify with most strongly?
Sustainable life extension, significant life extension, because there's 2 billion people on the planet, 20 million in the U.S. that are on borderline of basic 222. So it's something that we can identify and move with. So significant life extension to me is all aspects of that, and it's also the quality of those lives that we're dealing with and the ability to become self-sustainable and contribute back to society. So significant life extension is the short answer to that.
What are, in your view, some of the major problems in contemporary American society? How can transhumanism aid in resolving those problems?
Yeah, I think we've got this polarized tribalism that is being encouraged, really, by the present system, the president, the current president, to pick a side, and then through picking the side on certain hot buttons and issues, that's how we're going to decide who the president is, or who our representatives are. And so, Trump says fake news all the time, and there's plenty of it, plenty of fake news, and oftentimes both sides of the picture are in some way distorted, and to relate to special interest or I keep going back to special interest. You can tell that there's at least a nagging awareness that there's something there. Uh, so yeah, that's about that.
And how can transhumanism aid in resolving those problems?
Well, the the innovation that allows man to uh, achieve less with less work is a reality. It's also a problem, right? Because man is recognized his value, woman is maybe not as much for their work. So when it yeah, I'm sorry. So I'm looking out the window, and it's I lost my train of thought. But the transhumanist values directly affect the quality of people's lives, the extension of how long they're going to live, how healthy they're going to live, and how they're able to enjoy their community. So transhumanism, if we do significantly extend the lives of those on the planet, including, as I say, getting nutrition so that we can stimulate the brain power of the 2 billion people that are borderline. We can solve some of the issues just by including more into the party.
In your view, what aspects of contemporary American politics work well, and what aspects of contemporary American politics are broken and or malfunctioning?
Well, the two-party system, I think, is something that is antiquated, and it doesn't give enough choice to the people that would normally vote in a primary. So as far as election goes, I think everyone should be able to vote in one primary. Whether if you're a Democrat and you want to vote Republican that year, then you should be able to pick which candidate you could. So I think a three-party system would be far advantageous, or multi-party, similar to Europe. And it's going to be a mess either way we go, and until we actually put scientific facts in front of people, and we are educated to the point that we are given a choice. If there's 7.6 billion people on the planet and we only have enough water for 5 billion people, let's be honest about that and come up with some solution that doesn't that affects the least the most negatively.
Yeah. If elected President of the United States, what policy measures will you pursue?
You know, I would love to have a security clearance before I answered this question, because it's such a hypothetical. But I would end Citizens United. I would end ALEC. I would advocate for. As president, you don't do any of these things, but I would certainly support legislation to get those out of the way. As I mentioned, Citizens United, and I would go to the people. I'd love to put a question on the census. That's big in the news these days. Do you have adequate, dignified access to food, water, shelter? And see what people would answer yes or no. I think we need to take human trafficking, abuse against women and children, protection of our waterways, and use as a base minimum those 222s, the 2 gallons of water, the 2,000 nutritional calories, and the 200 cubic feet of shelter as base minimums that we as a population our inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where life is dependent upon food, water, shelter, I would put a program in to where people, regardless of their income, could have sanitary conditions and dignified access to those minimums, and make that as a national policy. As well as I would use that as guidelines for our foreign aid.
That's what I was going to ask you. So, a question I have is is the 222 a policeman of the world? Are you going to police everyone to ensure that everybody has
No.
nutritional access, or is this a nationalist policy? Is this an America First 222, or is it? Are you flirting with both?
Yeah, what I'm promoting is that we use 222 as common indicators within the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't want to build a juggernaut as an organization. I want to identify people and organizations and industries that are affecting a certain population, assess their dignified access to food, water, shelter as a base minimum of 222, and then look at, say, okay, what is that costing society currently? What organizations are spending hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of dollars on this issue? And what other organizations, if they were coordinated with that, how could we get those base minimums and those people up on their feet the soonest? So it's an international movement. It's more than that. I'm looking to expand the collective consciousness of each one of us to say that wait a minute, I am better off if my neighbor has dignified access to food, water, shelter, because I'm not sure how many neighbors away that I'm not safe. But because of the science and the technology and the ability to portray that in artistic ways and informative ways, I want 222 to be an information system. I don't want I'm not dictating that everybody gets this and let's set up the lines. But there are agencies that say, hey, if we had this, we could set up these lines. Besides just getting water there, we could actually work with the agriculturalists, or with agriculture and with sanitation, and use those practices to bring that 2 billion people up to some measure of consumerism so that we could bring them into the economy.
So
But it's sustainable.
three places in the United States that I can think of just off the top of my head that would really benefit from this policy would be Hawaii as a state, because there's a lot of homeless and a lot of poverty in Hawaii. Detroit, and even there in Florida, there's a lot, and one more I forgot. But
LA for sure.
LA, that's the one I was trying. Oh, and San Francisco. There's some big mega cities in the United States which have basically huge populations, which are now would be massive beneficiaries of this, but their state government is struggling, right?
Well, what we're doing is last night I was out at the University of South Florida with the food sovereignty group that's forming there, and there are a number of different departments within the universities, a number of different local organizations that work with the food sovereignty and the different organic farms around. They were looking to put together this coalition that identifies the homeless and what excess food is produced in the community, how to get those two together. So each local city here has some organizations working together. When I mentioned 222 to the professor and the people at the meeting, everybody says, yeah, that there's something there, there's some potential. So we're going to do a little symposium the 22nd, bring the community together and have some experts talk, and there'll be some 222 there, because it's something that organizations can get behind. So I see it as being something of a trade organization that puts these packages together, and then we go to the foundations and the people that have that are used to evaluating and monitoring the effectiveness of these programs can use 222 as those base indicators.
So you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. That's a United Nation enterprise. So a double-edged question here. Would you be happy to work with the United Nations on this issue? Because the United Nations obviously is an outsourcing mechanism for the government. They push their problems there. And two, where do you mentioned excess food. Where do you stand on GMOs?
You know, I have an avoidance to GMOs, but I know if there's a better way than through other engineering processes food fortification and crossbreeding, and I'm all for that. But I'm not an expert in GMOs. I know a lot of people that are not in favor. And when a chicken breast is twice the size, honestly, I don't feel as comfortable eating it as I do a well-fed, grass-fed beef or whatever eating what they normally eat and don't grow twice as fast. I think it's probably better for me. But if people are starving to death and that's the way to produce that food, then you have to make those decisions. So again, it's all back to science, right? And the Transhumanist Party is all about science. So I'm the candidate for the nomination for the party. I'm not a scientist, and I want to be very clear about that.
So you would within your council, you would look at what your scientists are saying, and you would say, all right, I have a decision based on that. So,
well, not just my scientists. I'd want the opposing side as well.
Monsanto. I think you'll very quickly and easily get Monsanto into the room. I don't think you'd have
Oh, I didn't say Monsanto. I said the other side as well. But Monsanto, they fit right in the drawer. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you'll have a problem talking to those guys. Oh, that's fantastic. So we'll just. I know you want to wrap up soon, so I'll push back to where we started. So how did you get onto, unless you want to keep going, it's up to you.
I'm okay for a little bit.
So how did you get involved with Occupy Wall Street? Because Occupy Wall Street to the conservative side is a bunch of drum banging weirdos, and to the left, to Anonymous and these other ones, it was almost an attempt to overthrow the financial elites of 2008 and prior. How did you get involved with that? Why was that important? And what did you see in those people that other people didn't see?
Well, I didn't go up for Occupy, honestly. I was going up to D.C. I was going to get an apartment, and I was going to put on my business attire, and I was going to go to the different representatives and talk about this program that I had for scientific need and the funding for this rapidly deployable inflatable housing structure. And so that's what I was going up for. And Occupy broke out the day I got there is when they had to permit on Freedom Plaza. And there were all these causes. People were GMOs, drones, Guantanamo, all of the issues. And there were informed people there. There were doctors, there were attorneys, there were a lot of veterans. And so I didn't stand out the first day. Right, I was just one of many white males over 50 that were there, and there were a lot of career protesters there as well. There were homeless there on the park before we got there. But the first night I slept in the open air, and then the momentum, you could feel it from those organizations that were used to being in D.C. They were used to dealing with the park police, and there was an order that was soon kept, and also a code of conduct on the plaza with written rules and meetings twice a day to determine how the group would proceed. And it was quite orderly, really. And I had my dog, I had my bicycle, I could go between the different parks, and because I was so mobile, and I had my Tampa Fire Department shirt on that I'd been honored to, one of the captains had given me, so I could take a troop or a squad of 5 guys that had been breakdancing on the patio with 5-gallon water jugs over to City Hall and fill up the water jugs while it was a surreal experience in many ways. But I got to thinking, okay, there's people here that they want to be heard. I want to be heard. I still have my sports jacket in my tent, but let me see where this momentum and all this energy goes. And soon, 3.5 months later, they bulldozed the plaza, bulldozed it, but wrapped it up quite brutally, and took all the things away. And but I still stayed there in the Peace House, which was owned by William Thomas and Ellen Thomas, uh, and until I was expelled from there. I'm a passionate, large experience when I get fired up about something, and so I got to where I was drawing a little too much attention. So I was asked to leave the comforts of the Peace House. But I'd made a squad up of different people that would help Connie while I was gone, and so I got caught up in it out of Global Shelter Project, and that's a blog that I made, and it came out of that structure, and that's why that little cover in front of the White House is significant to me, because that was 200 cubic feet, and that cathartic experience I had on the road, 200 cubic feet inside that little Prius, and then the sleeping in a tent just anywhere is about 200 cubic feet. So it came, at the time I was using 1.75 gallons of water, 2,000 calories, and 200 cubic feet of space. But the 1.75, because I read somewhere in the World Health Organization that was what the minimum required for life was. But then I read just not that long ago that it's actually the other numbers are 7.5 liters to 13.5 liters, depending on condition. And 7.5 liters is 1.98 gallons. So there's been a lot of little things along the way that have given me an affirmation that says, Charles, this is a huge thing. You're trying to save the world. But that's what I set out to do in 2005. And really what I set out to do when I was 5, I'm thinking, the world is my oyster, and let me see what I can get. If I can get my point across, we'll all get across the bridge, but we can't go across it all at the same time, and we need to build other bridges, but we can do better than this, is really what it gets down to.
What do you think of the other candidates in the race, Mr. Johannes and Rachel Haywire? What do you think of them?
Transhumanism is a fairly recent thing. I remember when Zoltan, I heard word of a guy driving around and talking about radical life extension. I remember, but I couldn't tell you his name. The same way as you remember Herman Cain in 999? You remember what 999 stood for?
No, but I remember Herman Cain.
Nobody does, right? Nobody does. So
it sounds like a 9/11 conspiracy or something.
I don't know. It had something to do with interest rate and something.
Oh, it's a tax. It was the flat tax thing. That's right.
Yeah. But 222, once you hear it, it's food, water, shelter, and I think it'll be more along. But so I think my platform will reach a larger audiences than Ben's or than Rachel's. I think it affects more people, certainly, which will be a more common message. John or Johan is as far as policies, he's more detailed. He's got his Futurist New Deal and there's things in his. I like the use of public lands with great study and legislation on how it would be used, but public land for common good. We need to build oases all over the world to solve the refugee problem. And the only way we're going to solve it is if we have some destination for them to go to reestablish themselves with food, water, shelter. So if we have a U.S. initiative here within the U.S. and those other countries, we figure out how to help them best do it for themselves. And the 21st century is going to have lots of challenges that we're ignoring right now. But the 21st century is approaching, a quarter of the way here already. Mm-hmm. So it's time that we look at those existential threats, and I don't see Rachel or Ben prioritizing those. So I believe my message can get. I believe it can get to be a conversation within the other parties, And that's what I really want to do. Is I want the 222 to show up on a sign behind Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump, make America great again, 222, and so the networks will have to say, what is this 222 thing? And then people will have to ask themselves, wait a minute, are we better off if the guy on the other side of the border has sustainable, dignified access to food, water, shelter? Am I going to feel better when I visit there? I use the analogy of I guess it's an analogy example. If somebody's got a 420-foot yacht and they can only sail it into 70% of the countries around the world, and they only feel comfortable staying on the yacht or venturing into very limited spots around those ports, if those are holding some of the cards that are strangling some of the change that's required for our energy industry and whatnot, I'd be happy if they bought themselves another 500-foot yacht and became heroes because they helped transform the industries that we're beholden to at this point that are exacerbating the existential threat of climate change and social unrest. So, I want to make Donald Trump a hero. I want to make you a hero. I want to make everybody a hero by just saying we can do better than this. And these are the scientists that are telling us how those things might work. And this is how I can invest my assets into something that will benefit myself and future generations. And that can be done. And the transhumanists, I think, are well, there's so few right now, right? I mean, we need to expand. Yeah, there's not that many transhumanists. It's not like we're talking to even 20,000 people right now that are within the party. So the idea is to expand the party, and that's where my campaign slogan is: "Welcome to the party." And I see musicians and artists that if they're stimulated by 222, it's a great way to put it into song or anything else. It's catchy, it's memorable. So as I say, I want it to get to where it becomes a topic of conversation in the down ballot, and where it becomes a real choice for humanity to come together, recognize our predicament as our species, as well as the other millions of species that are threatened and that we're losing every day. The rainforests that we're losing. So how to plant enough trees to reoxygenate the planet from what we're using, and what that will do with the conditions that we're meeting with severe atmospheric. I'm not sure how to say anything that won't offend somebody when it comes to climate change or global warming, but the conditions, they are changing, and we need to build ways to adapt to that. Both those established cities and again the millions of refugees.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to quickly touch on, because I know you can cut it whenever you want. I'll just tell me when. I don't want to, but wealth inequality. Can you just talk about wealth inequality? Because 222 sounds like wealth inequality. It's the money flows up, so therefore the resources flow up. So therefore the people without access to that capital and that money, even the new digital coins and all of that, can't access this 2,000 gallons of fresh water and this 2 gallons of fresh water, 2,000 now national calories and feet of sustainable, secure shelter.
Yeah. So we have all these agencies, and you mentioned a number of them that our public dollar goes to that aid of people that the constituencies that are lacking 222 in some way. Billions of dollars, right? Tens of billions of dollars, as well as as an old capitalist, the first thing you do is you identify a need, right? And then if you identify a need, then you figure out a way to who's supplying that need, and you try to get in between it or do it yourself. And there's no shortage of the, as I say, census of who doesn't have food, water, shelter. So when we're spending these billions of dollars and we're studying GMOs and we're studying, the hydrology of the planet all of the different sciences, if we can have as a common goal 222 and get that base minimum to where it is actually producing. So not only just supply that need, but identify some unit of work. And that's not going to be easy. And we're getting into automation and AI and all the other aspects of transhumanism. But we have to make a choice. Do we have enough food? Do we have the will, and do we have the way to get food to these people, to get water to these people, so that they, and do we have the confidence in them to become self-sustaining members of society the same way that we could if we have those basic elements? And can we expect them not to? And are we prepared for them to die if they don't? So there's some real tough questions. And, I think we have to figure out what's urgent and what's necessary and take appropriate action.
Charles Holsopple?
Yeah.
Mr.
Yes,
Charles
sir.
Holsopple, thank you very much for coming.
Holsopple. Yeah.
Holsopple, yep. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Candidate number 2. You're invited back anytime you want. You can update us anytime, anything you want on 222, or use the platform how you wish. It's absolutely a pleasure for having you here on Detonation, and we wish you all the best in your primary campaign. And just thank you very much. And you've got an incredibly interesting story too. So I was so captivated.
Well, thank you. I didn't mean to run on, but remember,
No, that's
not too late to register.
Yeah, that's
you're an allied member if you register. You know that works that way, right? You could vote within the.
Oh, I do, but I'm not sure if the audience.
Oh yeah, well, let me mention that. And then I didn't mention project222.org. That's our website. It's built by a volunteer in London, and I have a volunteer coming, an intern coming from Nepal in a couple of months to work on program development and all of our MOUs and so forth. So I'm really excited about that.
Project222.org, right?
.org, right?
.org.
Exactly.
So that's fantastic. So if you're interested in 222, go and check out that. And I've seen the website; it looks really nice at the moment, and yeah, it's coming along. It'll
still needs work, but
yeah, it'll get filled up.
Yeah,
get filled up.
Thank you. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show. So more Detonation coming all your way all this week. The Unshackled.net. Thank you, Mr. Holsopple.
Thank you, Steele. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.